It's a lot of smart people in one room. Welcome to you all, and thanks for being with me. And I love how every session here flows into the other. The conversation right before this, the one before that, perfectly sets up the conversation that we're going to have now on sovereignty and how important that is in AI, which is hugely crucial because just a few kilometers from where we are right now, the Indian government has this massive summit, right? Where one of the key questions facing everyone is how important is sovereignty to AI, especially for a country like India. So, AI is fast becoming the infrastructure of power. Obviously, everyone knows that, shaping economies, security, and society. The question today, if intelligence drives the future, should nations control it or should markets control it? I'm super happy to have such an incredible panel here. I'm going to quickly introduce them. Rafi Krikorian of Mozilla, building open, privacy-focused and public interest AI for an open internet, needs no introduction. Mozilla is incredibly famous, has built an incredible name for itself. Arun Subramaniam of our platforms that let organizations run their own private AI. Siddharth Bhatia of Pooch AI, welcome Siddharth, creating consumer AI products focused on accessibility and real-world adoption in India. Manu Chopra of Karya, he's the CEO, building ethical AI data infrastructure using a distributed rural workforce, very important for us here in India. And Anag Prasad, bringing in that investor piece, which is so important to how this entire world moves forward as far as India is concerned. I'd like to start it off with you, Rafi. How important is sovereignty in your view as far as AI is concerned? And I'm asking from an India perspective. One is aware of how important the openness of technology is to your organization. Give us your perspective as far as India is concerned.
I mean, I think sovereignty is important at every single level. So I think there's one question, which is sovereignty at the governmental level, which I think is incredibly important. I think value chains are very different across the world. So I think the Indian value chain is different than others. So therefore, sovereignty there matters. But I think sovereignty also actually matters all the way down to the individual level of like, can we not have a world where we only have 7 AGIs show up, but how do we have a world where we have 7 billion AGIs show up so we each have one that's actually on our side? So I think that kind of sovereignty is the world that I want to proceed toward, which is just like we have sovereignty from the bottom up, from the individuals all the way up to the nation states.
Arun, you represent a world where we're talking about AI deployed at the enterprise level. Where does sovereignty fit into that? Because at the enterprise level, things change dramatically. There are all these other pulls and pressures. There are scale issues. There are compliance issues. How important is sovereignty there?
So I feel sovereignty is only one part of the coin.
Yeah.
Right. So you need sovereignty, which I would equate to defense of nations. Same thing with defense of corporations. But the other side of the coin is heritage, which I would equate to diplomacy. Which one is something that you want to share in terms of being a soft power. Another is something that you want to use not only to secure, but also to deter, right? Both of those are something you need to be careful about. And countries are grappling with it as we speak, but companies are far from even starting to think about it because the security landscape went from, I want to secure everything, to I cannot secure everything because things are moving so fast outside. Where the security notion has gone from being extremely high security to today a bit lax. We're going to go back to high security again. My humble request to this panel and also to the audience is talk about sovereignty without talking about heritage is just as dangerous as talking about security without talking about diplomacy.
Oh, that's incredible. I'm going to explore that theme a little bit more because that distinction is an important one to make, as we get a little deeper. But just a point to note that Rafi talked about all the different layers where he believes sovereignty should exist. And I think this panel actually sort of reflects in many ways all of those different layers. So this is super useful for anyone listening in on this. Siddharth, the applied AI space in India is picking up. Your company is a shining example of that. Talk to us about what sovereignty means to you as far as your company, as far as your product is concerned, because dependency on global models is very much a reality even now.
Yeah, I think sovereignty, everyone's kind of focused on that. India is doing a great work on the models aspect and building sovereign models. At the same time, we felt this entire piece would be incomplete if you don't have sovereign distribution as well. So Amitabh Kant sir recently, he remarked that there's this new neo-colonization trend which is going on where companies like OpenAI and Gemini, they'll take billions worth of data for free by giving their products for free, and then they'll sell back their products back to these countries for billions of dollars. So that is why they're coming to us. There's no free lunch in the world. So that is the piece in that entire stack which we're focusing on, trying to have sovereign distribution where the data lies within the country, and I think that feedback loop can be used better for training models. Having said that, it's not to say that global models aren't important. Yeah. And even today, math and logic and science, reasoning, all of those global models, we're not still at par. But there's obviously, for the linguistic concerns and, whatever Indic languages, the nuances, accents, dialects, all of those things, for that we have to have local, innovation, and that is where the, we have like a markup over the global model. So that is what sovereignty means for us. Yeah.
Which is great because Manu can talk very much about that. Manu, the human input, in the deployment and employment of AI with your company, Karya, is from rural India. What's in your mind as a person who runs this company as far as an Indian model versus a global model is concerned? Are there concerns there?
Right. Happy to be here. I think India has over 19,000 unique dialects based on the last census. And a language is just like, a dialect with an army. Yeah. So there are at least 19,000 unique subcultures that need to exist online that we need to make sure our models work for. So I define sovereignty not just as making sure we have, world-class AI models and world-class AI companies in the country, which we need to, but also making sure that AI works in all of these languages, in all of these contexts, right? And I think, at the AI Summit, we've been hearing such incredible things. We've been working closely with Bhashani and with the government of India to think deeply about how can data collection happen in a way that's not extractive, but in a way that actually brings economic opportunities to our communities. At Karya, over the last 3 years, we've been able to engage with over 140,000 people across every state in the country, and we've been able to engage with them to build data sets, foundational data sets, over 65 million entries last we checked, in 70 plus Indian languages. And most of it gets open sourced, right? It gets open sourced through, and again, just like I want to acknowledge the blessing of things like AI Kosh, right? Like you can go to AI Kosh today, which is like the Indian Hugging Face for those of you who are hearing about it for the first time, and you can download so much of these data
sets. This is a very smart audience, they've definitely heard of it.
I'm glad. That plug was for don't use that. But it is AI Kosh is incredible. The work that Bhashani is doing, we just contributed to something called Vani, which was led by Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and that's over 20,000 hours of data that just got open sourced during the summit. So I think it is extremely important that this data moat that does exist absolutely gets taken care of. So startups like Pooja, like what you're doing, it should be very easy for you to enter all of these communities, right? A project that's very close to my heart, we've been working with the district of Nandurbar. It's a lovely district, 4 hours from Surat in Maharashtra, in the Maharashtra-Gujarat border, and it's absolutely beautiful, led by an incredible district collector, Dr. Mitali, and she has been working in her district. She has 6 tribal languages that didn't have AI models or AI technologies, and working in the district with the people of the district, be able to build foundational data sets, be able to work with AI for Bharat, the next step, and then build models, be able to deploy the models, and then over the last 6 months, we've done over 500,000 evaluations of AI technologies, again working with the people, right? Look, what Karya has taught us is the communities we serve are not just excellent beneficiaries of AI models. They're not just, like great use cases. They, of course, that's very exciting, but they're also excellent builders, excellent evaluators of these AI models. And if we truly want to build inclusive AI, we will have to engage with the communities we want to include. And to me, that is sovereignty. Can we make sure that AI works in all those 19,000 dialects as well as it does in English for all of us?
Yeah, and we started today's summit. I'm sure you saw some of it, Manu, with Sarvam, which is also doing incredible work
Just absolutely
in that
incredible
sense.
work.
And
Yeah.
you know, I did put the question about sovereignty to Pratyush as well. But Anand, to bring you in, on the all-important investor piece in all of this, from an investor lens. How do you look at sovereignty in AI? Is it an imperative? Is it a near-term thing? Is it a regulatory sort of requirement? Is it a sort of long-term structural shift? How do you see it?
I think, Shiv, the short answer is it's a long-term structural shift, and I want to add some color to it. What we are mostly talking about right now is a very specific types of models, which is large language models and research around it. Yes, it is very important to play catch up to it, build the infrastructure, build the models and so on. But if we really want to do enable a long-term structural shift, I think as a country, as a tech ecosystem, we need to be ambitious. So there are so many open problems in AI, right? There's how to do post-training, right? Reinforcement learning techniques, using that to a lot of what Siddharth was attributing to Indian users' data. How do I use that to keep training models better? Running AI on the edge, for example. We are trying some companies which can train models on quantum computers, for example, which is not a thing today, which will be a thing soon. So I think we have to think about it in decades, not years. And we have to shed the mindset that we are late. I don't think we are late at all. We have started talking about it at the right time. We are early, is what I feel. And there's a lot to do over the next 20 years. One option could be, as an economy, you sit down and say, okay, I'm great at implementing tech, I'm great at using tech. But the gap between an economy which is creating this tech and someone who is just using it will keep widening, right? And 20 years later, we'll look back and see, okay, we did a huge mistake, right? Because we are a knowledge and a skill-based economy. More than 50% of GDP, more than 50% of exports comes from services. It is an imperative, has to be long-term structural. We're trying to play our part, but encouraging to see the government directly talking about it, people like you directly talking about it.
No, you're absolutely right. The clarity, Rafi, and coming back to you on that, is that there is a national acknowledgement that AI is necessarily global, but there is also an equal recognition that the time is now to build those sovereignty guardrails. India has seen, I think it was Siddharth who made that point about, those who use your data and then sell the products back to you. India has already had that experience, whether it is with the internet, whether it is with social media, many other digital products as well. And there is a sort of subliminal sense that shouldn't happen with AI. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think about it as, that you all have actually created amazing infrastructure already. You've done things like UPI, you've made it such that you don't want your transactions owned by a Visa corporation, for example. You will control that yourselves. And I think there's an exact same opportunity here when it comes to sovereignty on AI. The phrase I like to think about a lot is, are we owners or are we renters when it comes to intelligence? And I think that you all shouldn't stand for the decisions for intelligence being made by 3-5 CEOs based in San Francisco. So I think that you can then build technology which allows you to both benefit, be owners in this equation, both benefit from the investments that you are making. So your data goes into making your systems better, because at the same time, you all have a local value system that may not be exactly the same as other people's value systems. So just reflect that into the systems that you're building.
Foundational models, Arun, there is a dilemma. There is a very central dilemma here in India, where there is one school of thought which says, look, foundational models will rapidly become a commodity. There is no point building your own foundational models. Build off of them, fine-tune them, deploy them in specific ways. But the other school of thought is exactly the opposite. And we're actually expecting to see some announcements this week about, Indian foundational models. Your thoughts on that? Because both sides are, very staunchly against the other school of thought.
I think the reality is somewhere in between, and we're already living that. And first and foremost, I want to say a huge kudos to Sarvam and every other company that's actually building the models, right? So because building models, as many people who are talking about it, actually doing it is incredibly hard. no matter like what they are competing against. So let's just please give them a big round of applause. That's not something that is small to do, right? And the second thing is, there's no need to recreate a foundation model that already exists. Why bother spending all those hundreds of millions of dollars? Learn from that. And I might say something contrarian here, so apologize in advance. The country that actually did that was China. And they responded to not only the world's pressure, not just by saying they'll go after large compute or small compute, they went after algorithmic advances. And they did that in a very smart way, meaning they learned from every model that got published. And the open weight models are really not that interesting to me. What is more interesting is the research that they publish. And the research that they publish is not just MIT licensed. They publish how they got about the data sets, how they built the models, which really is what costs you hundreds of millions of dollars of researcher hours to do, which then you can stand on top of. Right, and that's another ask that we are trying to work here in the country in terms of all the 5 layers that Jay talked about, not just from energy production, but how do you optimize energy with AI, but going up the stack. Sovereignty in AI is not just about having a sovereign model.
Yeah.
It is having all 5 layers where you are infusing your own thing. And India is uniquely capable of building systems that only can be built in India, that the rest of the world can actually take advantage of. So UPI is a great example, lots of examples like that. Think about what algorithms, say, for example, the Indian Mathematical Institute can actually influence to go after languages that you talked about. And the notion of languages being disjoint and 19,000 dialects, in one side is massively challenging, on the other side is hugely influential because there are concepts that are common across almost all of those 19,000 dialects. Very few countries can say that, which means you can take language, something like Hindi, which has a lot of digital representation, and take a language like Bhojpuri, which doesn't have as much representation, and have a model that is almost near the same quality. Can only be done with not just data sets here, but also algorithms that have to be born here. Right?
Very interesting. Siddharth, again, flowing from that, as far as foundational models are concerned, in your view, since you're in the trenches of this right now, would sovereignty, the presence of a foundational Indian model, throw up more opportunities business-wise for Indian startups, or would it be a kind of barrier, given how things are right now?
I think it will definitely open opportunities. Our startup is like a clear example of that.
Yeah.
It's not just that a foundational model, whether it should be built or not. I think the primary thing is companies in the US, for them priorities would be languages like English, French, German, maximum say up to Hindi. But you still have to focus on the entire tier 2, tier 3 cities in India, different accents, different dialects. For example, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, you have different variations of Telugu being spoken. And North Andhra Pradesh has a different Telugu than South Andhra Pradesh. So to be able to handle all those nuances and to be able to handle all those dialects, you definitely need a foundation model. And because of this entire sovereign stack, there'll be like tons of opportunities out there. The foundational aspect, I think, just contrarian to what Arun ji also said, for the end consumer, they don't really care what model is being used underneath. So whether you're using Llama 3, Llama 4, you're using Sarvam, you're using, say, Gemma, so they don't really care about that. But having said that, it's the responsibility for the company which is providing it to them to be able to handle that, that data remains secure, it remains within the country, it's not being used in a way which is against the DPDP Act. So all of that has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
And that is how the entire feedback loop can be used to power better models and take it from there.
No, and first, Arun and Siddharth, please don't apologize for having contrarian views. I think that's the beauty of this debate and this discussion right now, is because so many aspects of what we're doing is feeling in the dark and getting to know what the other side thinks. But Manu, the conversation around sovereignty, when it gets to become a conversation about population scale, there is no better example than India for the potential for AI to be deployed. And in the space that you are in, where you're working with vulnerable communities, remote communities, rural communities, where there's a huge amount of data being harnessed from those communities, from that lens, how important is, potentially an Indian foundational model?
Again, like if the goal is to make sure...
because the reason I ask, sorry to interrupt, is because there are issues of dignity, there are issues of, inclusivity, etc., which enter the picture there.
Absolutely. And look, those issues exist across contexts for our communities. I'll give you some examples, right? If if I'm in Delhi and say I speak Bengali and I ask a question to some of these AI models today about healthcare access to communities who speak Bengali, 3 of the top 5 models that we evaluated confuse Bangladesh and India and give a bunch of answers that combine public health resources in Dhaka with public health resources in Kolkata, right? While I'm sitting here in Delhi, right? That's just like a classic example. I mean, simpler example, if you ask in Kannada, I want to be healthy, what do I eat? These models will say you should have lots of broccoli and kiwi, which again is accessible to many people in Karnataka, in Bangalore, but isn't culturally useful. So it starts with, how do we make sure AI is just not a parlor trick, but is actually as helpful for our communities as it is for all of us? And I think, like I said earlier, the only way to do that is by involving our communities and understanding what matters to them, paying them, economically supporting them for that work that they do. I think that's step one. That's really, really critical in making sure that whichever model it is, making sure that it actually is helpful to our communities. And I think, again, the hope is that models built in India would work better for Indian context, would work better for our communities, and I think that's really exciting, right? So I hope that happens.
Hopefully, by the end of this week, there will be more clarity on where things stand as far as those foundational models are concerned. It's a very exciting space, honestly. No matter what the contrarian views are, where this actually lands, and it's a story in motion, which makes it even more exciting. Anand, how do you see the flow of capital as far as the sovereignty debate is concerned? Is it more in terms of flowing into infrastructure? Is it about the stack itself? Throw some light on that.
Yeah, I think we have been talking about the 5-layered AI cake since the morning, and true sovereignty would mean having all of these layers independently sovereign as well. And I feel, or I hope at least, that different types of capital might flow into different layers, but we need it right from the ground up. In fact, I would argue we have to start from energy, right? So what are we doing for nuclear energy, for example, right, to reduce our dependence on imports? So we start with that. Data center build-outs, networking build-out, chips, making chips. Again, one narrative is that chips is kind of a done space, you can't do much innovation there. I think that's also not true. So we have to build our own chips, which are great for both training and inference. We have to have indigenous companies starting there. Then, of course, at the model level, all the gentlemen talked about it. We have to have models here for different types of, not just different languages, but also different types of tasks. So, for example, simple case like accounting, how you would do tax accounting in the US, for example, is very different from how a CA would do it here in India. And it's very inefficient to try to adapt a US-based accounting model to do it for India. And if we want to free up CA's time here to do more value additive work and take away grunt work, we have to have a model for example, accounting in India. Just a simple example there. And then the applications and distribution. I think VCs have typically been doing more of application stuff, but we are increasingly doing more of infra as well. But especially on some of the national build-out zones like nuclear energy, for example, there has to be government-led capital, which helps build this entire stack.
Yeah, just one follow-up question to you, Anand. Is the government's view of where capital is flowing and where it should flow, as far as what you just described, is there clarity on that? Do you see that things are happening decisively, or is that also a debate within the policy-making circles?
I wouldn't know much actually from inside. From what I'm just reading in the news, I think there's a lot of direction and optimism, and I think a lot of headlines in the right direction. So I'm hoping that is getting coupled with clarity around actual implementation as well, but this from the outside.
Arun, you want to add to that? Yeah.
I just had another contrarian view there, just because I've been working closely with a lot of government institutions the last 5 years. I've been incredibly positively impacted by how people in the government want to get something done. I would say in India, it's one of the fewest countries where government has done a lot more than the private sector has done in terms of investing in AI. Apologize for anybody who's from the private sector. Like, there's a lot of talk from the private sector. Just look at the amount of investment dollars that has flown, both from the VC community in India on large-scale infrastructure, not application level, but below on the 5-layer cake. I think that has to change.
Yeah, Siddharth, you want to respond to that? And I'll get Manu also. He says government's done a lot more than the private sector as far as this is concerned.
Yeah, I think there's obviously, once the government's taken initiative, you see the AI summit, the scale of the summit itself. 5 years back, we couldn't imagine something like this would be happening, where every CEO of every top company is present in India. So to be able to see that kind of I think support coming top down from the government is definitely enabling every other player, whether it's like a VC fund or any other startup, to think in that direction. I think that's opened a lot of opportunities. So yeah, I also feel that way, that the government has kind of done much more.
You share that view, Manu? That
Look, I do, and I think
I don't know if the subliminal message from Arun is that the private sector needs to do more.
It is.
The government is trying to set an example now. The private sector needs to shed some of its inhibitions and do more.
See, I think the India AI mission, with its chakras and sutras and all the things that the mission is doing, with the working groups and the expert engagement groups, it represents the most progressive public policy document I have seen on AI diffusion, and I think that's important. I think to Anak's point, I'm especially interested about economic workflow mapping right now. Like, I think we've all seen Claude Code and the incredible productivity software engineers are seeing with AI, and very interested to figure out how does that come to the average Indian. You know what I mean? But who obviously is not a software engineer, right? How do I make sure AI models make the ASHA worker more productive at their job? How do I make sure the AI worker makes the primary healthcare clinic provider more productive in their job? So yes, step one is making sure they work in our languages. That's very important. But I think where the startup opportunity exists, and that's why I think it's so incredible that the government of India is doing things like building these foundational data sets, because then people like Siddharth can come on top of it and build incredible startups without having to build the whole layer from ground up. And I think that's where we will see economic productivity gains, because for these AI companies, given the some displacement we will see, their social sanction rests on the fact that can we see growth in our communities, can we see economic productivity gains, and that will have to be across occupations, not just in software engineering.
Can I add to it, Shiv?
Yes.
I think if I speak more, it will become a fun debate, so I'll be short. I think government directionally is moving in that right direction, but it's tiny compared to what is actually needed. It's put into perspective. Overall commitments are in the billions kind of range right now that we have heard so far. For China, it's hundreds of billions. So there is a 100x delta, and it shows when our researchers trying to build models, right? The kind of compute needed, kind of also resources needed to just attract back. Let's say a lot of our great talent is in the valley right now. We want to seriously attract them. It can't be just for guest lectures. It has to be about giving them jobs here, making it an attractive place for them and their families, for example, to grow here. And that needs a lot more capital commitment, not just from the government. I totally agree. Private sector has to step up as well. But just the scale of this long-term structural shift that we are talking about, I think there's a 100x delta right now for us to cover the next few years to have a shot at it.
100x delta sort of quantifies the challenge before us, and you, in some ways, you answered the last question that I was going to ask, but I will come back to you, Anand. But Rafi, coming back to you for this final round, one layer of the entire sovereign/foundational conversation is, based on anxiety over whether we're doing the right thing, or is this the way to go? And like Arun mentioned, can it be a little bit of both? What would you say to the Indian government right now, if you had a chance, on the issue of sovereignty? Is it moving in the right direction? What sort of guardrails do you think it needs to put in place?
I mean, I think always do more in the grand scheme of things. I think if I were to think about some guardrails, I would think about things around agency. I would think around things around inclusion, of how do we actually build systems that actually allow people all the way from individuals all the way to the government to move independently from each other and actually be able to explore in different ways, but find ways that they can each see themselves in the systems, whether it be questions of language, whether it be questions of values. I think encoding both of those are the things I would say you have to accelerate on in order to get to true sovereignty quickly.
Arun, you want to answer that question? Prescription, 3 points.
From the government's perspective, I would say demand outsized outcomes. And the reason I use those words very carefully is there's been a lot of general acceptance and general, agreeing to this is what has to be done. But to the question of 10x, 100x impact, there's not a single government entity anywhere in the world that has a foundation model today. None. Why is the ask in India for the government to actually build one? Right, so that's the response that I would make. The second one is the reason for having a demand for an outsized outcome is exactly the likes of Claude Code, where what was impossible to do, not just 10 or 20% better, impossible to do just 6 months ago is possible today. That's the kind of unlock we need to be looking at, and take advantage or unfair advantage, that's okay. There's no fair game here.
Very important point and something to think about. Siddharth? Something you want the government to do, straight up. They're sitting at Bharat Mandapam, but trust me, they're watching.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why we're all here to try and voice our opinion to them. But one thing, I think, 2 points. One, there's obviously, sovereignty is there, it's important, but it shouldn't hamper, collaboration between different countries, and it shouldn't be that the control is within one country, it stays within that, because then, you'll be able to control whatever narratives are set going forward. So, for example, I'm just giving some hypothetical examples. You could, for example, say Arunachal Pradesh, part of that is part of China. You could have, POK part of like Pakistan. All of those narratives could be set if you have that entire control of what information is sent, and if you have that entire control. So obviously their sovereignty is required, but it should not be that this is just our model, you cannot share it, or there's no collaboration. The other part is around the distribution piece itself. That if the distribution, the data distribution is not so freely available that we just continuing that colonization what ended 50 years back, 60 years back, we're just doing that very same thing, giving our data, because that is our core strength right now. If you could use that, we could probably become the next biggest superpower based on AI. So I think we shouldn't lose that.
Superpower versus becoming a data colony, which is what that big anxiety is about. Manu, final comments.
Amen to that.
What should the government do? One thing.
I think, India is already and will continue to role model how AI should be used for good across the world. I think to Rafi's earlier point on things like UPI, we have proven time and again that we can build foundational digital architecture and keep it, like open to everyone to use, like keep it like free for people. I think we just need to keep doing that. I think my one request would be, and I've been telling this to several people within the government, I would love to see just a page where we account all these things that we're doing that are very successful. Like, I don't know how many people in the room know about what Bhashini is doing with the panchayat system. Right? We have every single panchayat meeting in the country is transcribed now by a Bhashini system in these languages. Things are flagged, and they're like, oh, this person said that. I mean, I know Amitabh sir talks about it all the time, but I wish there was like a place where you could just go and be like, okay, what model did they use? What was the evaluation structure? Not just from oh, this is what we're doing well. How can other people learn from it and then build on top of it? So if I'm building something for the same audience as the panchayat, I know I know the technical architecture and I can just build on that. And I think they're launching something called Gyan Kosh, which will hopefully do that. So I think that to me is most important, like just a directory of what's working across the context of the country. Yeah.
Final thought. You can close the thought, Anag.
Quick two things. I think one, let's try very hard to get our best talent in research and science in AI back to India and train the next gen here. And second, actively think about the job displacement and what policy has a role to play. I think a landing is coming. It might be a very hard landing in job displacement if we are not proactive about it. So what can the government do to make it a soft landing, and so that we recover during the transition period? So these are the two things I'll be thinking about.
I'm glad you mentioned job displacement. I didn't want to get into it too directly because we've got a whole session based entirely on that a little next. We're going to get a little deeper into that. But this has been incredible. Thank you for giving us a lot to think about, and for the system and the government a lot to think about, from people in the trenches, the practitioners, those who are actually leading the charge and getting those changes made. Thanks to all of you for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.